You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma Podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today, but before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatobi for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my two pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my two golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. And the one thing that I do with the sponsors that I have is stuff that I use and recommend, like the Diffies with my car, Hall of Fame. They're awesome. Citizens Banks, where I bank. Chickasaw Nation, huge supporter of Oklahoma. And adding to that is the Doghouse. And so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too. But I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedogHouseOKC.com and follow them on Instagram at thedogHouseOKC. And hopefully our pups will run into each other. Gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Harvey Pratt. Sir, thanks for coming down.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I know a lot about your background, working for the police force and being eyewitness artist and all of that stuff. But I don't know much about your Bigfoot side to your artwork and how that happens. So how does that first come about, and when do you first start hearing stories about Bigfoot?
About 1907.
Yeah.
I mean, not 1907, but 2007. I was contacted by a man by the name of Dade Politis,
okay,
who is a retired California police officer, and he's a Bigfoot researcher and paranormal. And he had been trying to get into some of the Oregon, Washington, California tribes to interview them because of the culture and the history with Sasquatch and those different tribes. And he was having trouble. The Indian people were a little reluctant to talk to somebody. And he saw online where I was a Native American forensic artist, and he contacted me. And initially he didn't tell me what he wanted me for. He just said, I have a kind of a sensitive program I want to share with you and see if you'd be interested in doing some drawings for me. And then he told me that some of the background, and that he had been into several of the tribes in northwestern America, and is having a hard time getting in there and letting Indian people talk to him about Sasquatch. So he said, and I think maybe with your background in forensics art, he said, would you be interested? I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be great. So he sent me out. Well, in fact, he went also, but I said, I got to have my wife with me. I said, my wife, Gina, takes care of all of the red tape and stuff like that and bookings. And I said, and she keeps me grounded,
Yes.
And he said, okay. He said, no problem. So that's when I first went out there, and I went up around a hoopah, And he said that the Indians were really reluctant to talk to anybody. Once they found out that I was an Oklahoma Indian, they kind of opened up a little bit. And he said, I'm not just going to let anybody come in here. He said, I want you to talk to credible people. So, and I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I've got some doctors and some nurses, and I got some educators, and I got some business people. He said, and some police officers and firemen. He said, that would be willing to talk to you about what they saw. And I said, okay. He said, so, it wasn't just somebody off the street, So they were all people that had some kind of job function and some kind of career. So we stayed up there a week interviewing people, anywhere from 6 to 7 people a day. And man, I heard some great stories. I mean, really stories that you could just see that these people were credible and they believed what they saw. They actually saw something up within 5 feet. Wow.
Yeah.
I interviewed a educator, a retired educator. She was 78 years old. She saw one. She saw several, but she had a motion light in her park. It lived way out in the mountains, had a motion light on her front of her house where the driveway was, and the light came on, so she went out. She's thinking it's a bear. She went out on the porch. She has a porch and a step down, and she said this big hairy man came walking across her driveway and came right up to her gate, so she walked down there. And she said, and I walked right up to my gate, and he's on the other side of the gate, and I'm looking almost straight up, and she's talking Native American to him. And she asked him if he was hungry, did he want something to eat? She said, just wait right here, I'll be right back. She turned around, ran into, he's almost 80 years old, Yeah. And she got a half a loaf of bread and put some apples in it and came down, and he's gone. So she ties it on the fence and goes back up, and the light comes on. By the time she goes out there, it's gone. And I said, what were you thinking to walk up to that thing that you're not even sure what it's going to do, and you walk right up to it? She said, hey, I'm 78 years old. I wanted to see him. And she saw him another time, and she was with another educator, and they were driving down the highway, and one ran across the road in front of him, and she says it's a good omen. It's a good omen. If you see one, you're going to be blessed. And the lady that was with said, no, that's not true. They're evil. They're the devil. They're terrible. They eat people. So you had 2 different people with 2 different attitudes about Bigfoot. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. So I interviewed all those kind of people like that in that area about their size, up to 12 foot tall, 800 pounds, different colors, different attitudes, different perceptions, and their physical being. I talked to a young couple that was up in the mountains driving, and they stopped, and there's a clearing down below them, and they saw a deer come running out of the trees across the meadow, and a Bigfoot chasing it. Now, a deer is pretty fast. Yeah. And this Bigfoot caught it. Oh my gosh. Caught it and carried it on, and just to give you an idea how fast they were. And then I interviewed a young Indian man from western Oklahoma, and this boy is probably in his early 20s, and he's 6'7". He's 6'7", weighs about 250, and one runs in front of him, and it runs down in the bar ditch over a fence, and he had just crossed a bridge. He said, I just pulled over. He said he wasn't worried. He said, I'm a big guy. He said, I'm a big guy. So he walks to the bridge and peers over the bridge, and he sees this Bigfoot standing down there. And Bigfoot rolls his eyes up, and they make eye contact. And when they make eye contact, Bigfoot turns and runs away across the meadow. He said, and he was gone just like that. And it must have been 300 or 400 yards. And he just, boom. And so just to give you an idea how powerful they are and how fast they are, that 4 years ago, I hit a 300-pound wild pig in my little sports car. Wow. I hit him at 45 miles an hour, knocked him into the bar ditch, and he stood there a minute, shook his head, jumped up, and ran off. And I interviewed a man that said he watched a Bigfoot hit a pig one time and kill it. Yeah. And I thought, I hit a pig at 45 miles an hour in my...
and it destroyed your car.
And it totaled my car.
Yeah.
It just caved everything in.
Yeah.
I hated it. I loved that little sports car. And then, so you think about it, I hit a pig at 45, it runs away. This man watches a Bigfoot hit a pig with one lick and kill it.
Yeah.
And so you just hear all those kind of stories, about people's perception of some say they're evil, some say they're just like the rest of us, where we have a Bigfoot that's brown, some that are black, some that are red, some are white, some are gray, some have a lot of hair, some have very little hair, and they vary. And you can see the expressions on their face, and they're just like human beings. We're all different races. We change, and that's the way they are. I had a lady that had owned 600 acres, and she said, I had two different groups of Bigfoot. She called them a Bigfoot tribe that lived often on my property. She said one group was hairy and black. Another group were not quite so hairy, and they were different. They were a different color, and the lighter colored carried weapons. She said they carried clubs, and you could hear them every now and then. She had the leader. She called it the elder, or she called him Angel, okay. And she heard him actually speak English words. What she actually heard him speak English words. And all the Indians, I interviewed Indians from all the West Coast, all across New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, and Ohio. That's where Dave Politis sent me to all these different places. And so I interviewed all these different people about color, size, and so I developed an interview system of what I would ask people based on my forensic art interviews. Okay. I wanted to know if they use tools, and people don't think about it if they use tools. He was carrying a stick, he was carrying a club, he was carrying a long, sharp stick that, so they did utilize tools, and they were different colors, and they had different mentalities. They some probably could hurt you, if you threatened their family or them. I interviewed a school teacher here from Oklahoma City that lived in eastern Oklahoma, and he goes home periodically, and he lives way out in the country. And he said, I needed to get the school system out of my head. I just needed to get out and walk, and so that's what he was doing. He said, I was walking, and he's in some rolling hills, some cliffs and ridges, and he stops, and he's going to light a cigarette, and he hears a noise, and then up pops 4 Bigfoots, an alpha, an older one, a juvenile, and a female, and they're all walking. He said the 2 alphas, they probably passed within 20 yards of me, didn't even look at me. They just walked on by. He said, I was afraid to move. He said, I was frozen. He said, and the juvenile looked at me, and it was kind of like, uh-oh, what I need to be careful. You could tell he was frightful and curious, but he was afraid. And the female was following up, and he said, and she turned and looked at me, and she curled her lip at me, like, just mess with my baby, And he said he said, after they left, he said, I just sat there for another 20 minutes, just because I didn't know where they were, and I didn't want to see them again. So you see those kind of things, and I've interviewed a policeman that was chased by one, as him and his wife were on a vacation, walking in southeastern Oklahoma, and they were walking by a stream with a trail, and they make a turn, and they see something off in the distance, and he's got a gun, and he jumps in front of his wife, gets up front, and he looks down, and he said, "My God, that's a Bigfoot." And he said he could see it about from here up, just from just above the waist. He said, I could see. And he said it slowly turned and looked at us. And when it looked at us, he said we took off. He said we were probably been walking for about 30 minutes. He said, and we started running back to the car. He said, and my wife was outrunning me. He said she was outrunning me. We were jumping over stuff, and you could hear him running parallel to us, crashing through the brush. And he said it once we got to the car, it left, and we left. But they came back the next day, and they went back down to where he saw him, and he walked down to where they were, and he could actually see footprints and stuff where it stood, and he stood down there and she stood where they were. And she could barely see him. She said, I could just see the top of his head. So she said, my husband, he was about 6'2". Yeah. She said, that thing had to be 8-9 foot tall. I said, well, you were armed. He said, it wouldn't have made any difference. It wouldn't have made any difference. My .38 wouldn't have done nothing. So you see those different variations and how people perceive them, and when they never even thought about them whatsoever. And you hear about researchers that go out and actually look for them. They never find them. They might say they hear, but they're carrying all kind of electronics and doing stuff, and making noises and big lights. But if you're out just walking around in the woods, that's when you see one.
Yeah.
See. El Reno, they've had sightings of Bigfoot around El Reno. They've had sightings of Bigfoot around Norman, and we have sightings all throughout Oklahoma, and I think they have a sense of humor, because if that Bigfoot wanted to catch that man and his wife, and they can catch a deer, he'd have caught him. He'd have caught him, but with nothing flat. He chose to run along parallel to him, chasing him home, tell him, and you hear that many times. I interviewed a family that was in New Mexico, and they were walking the power line trails, and they cleaned the power line trails, and he said, that's where we were walking. And he said, and over in the trees was a whole family of Bigfoots walking along with us. This is an Indian family. He said, and they walked with us all the way down to the road for probably 4 or 5 miles. They just walked along with us. He said, we could see them in there periodically. You could see them. And it's like they were just kind of, teasing us a little bit. But he said, we got to the car and we got out of there because you never know. And that's what you hear. You never know. Dave Paulides did a whole TV series about missing people out of national parks, and lots of people go missing, and people blame Bigfoot for a lot of those people missing. And who knows? Maybe you got in. Maybe you found the wrong guy. Maybe you found a Bigfoot that.
Yeah. Or something worse that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Right. This place is so big.
And there's another group they call the Dog Man.
Okay.
The Dog Man, and I've interviewed people in Texas, in Arkansas, and in Oklahoma. It's about the same size as a Bigfoot. It's hairy, but it has a wolf face.
Wow.
And they call them Dog Man. And I've actually drawn a couple of them. I interviewed a guy we were in Denver. This man was from Amarillo, and he's a rock hunter. he goes out and he searches for arrowheads and things like that, and that's what he was doing. And he called it the cliffs, on the Red Hills Cliffs. And he said, I parked my car out there and I walked through there because there's a creek that runs through there, and when it overflows, he said, that's when I find arrowheads. And he said, I'm walking through there looking around, and he said, and there's a cliff, and it's probably 40 foot high. And he said, and all of a sudden, it looks like this coyote comes right out of the cliff. He said, it comes right out of the cliff. He said, and it starts rolling and scooting and sliding around on its belly. And he said, and I'm thinking, that thing's got rabies. And he said, and then it scooted around and rolled around. He said, and then it stood up and it started morphing. It started just growing. It turned into a dog man. He said, when it stood up and looked at me, and he said, I turned around and ran back to my car. He said, and I've never been back there since. And I said, he said, I've never seen anything like that. And he didn't know that there was people talk about the dog man, and they're being cited everywhere. I interviewed a school teacher in southwestern Oklahoma, and he lives in that kind of an area of canyons and ridges, and he's about 12 miles out of the nearest town. And he saw a dog man come out of the canyon near his house, and he said there's a whole bunch of Bigfoot kids, family that live in there. He said, I've got a creek down about a quarter mile from my barn, and there's some big cottonwoods in there. And he said, and I watch these juvenile Bigfoots climb those cottonwoods and run around and jump in the trees and swing. And he said, and then they came up and stayed in my barn. He said, they don't bother me, I don't bother them. And that's when he noticed a Bigfoot and a dog man traveling together. And he had a photograph. Wow. And I asked him if I could, and he wouldn't give it to me. And you could see it.
You saw the photo?
I saw the photo.
Yeah.
And it looked, but I could only see about so much of it because he said he came out. He had a trail camera set up. Yeah. And he would go check it periodically. And it came up out of the canyon. And so when he got the motion, it took a picture. And he said, there's actually another one in there. He said, but it's over there. And if you look close, he said, but you can make it out. But it's hard to see. Yeah. So, and he said, I see them all the time. I see Bigfoot all the time. And he said, and they run across my pasture. He said, and they don't run like this. They run. He said, their strides are huge strides. And he said, and they just slap the ground. He said, and when they're out in the daytime, he said, they're out with cattle. Yeah. He said, they get out with the cattle, and they'll get on all fours and act like they're cattle walking around. He said, they're really pretty damn smart. And so that, when I started thinking about, when you say you hear them running, you would think they would, but he said, no. He said, it's a one long stride. He said, and their strides are 12 feet, 10 or 12 foot long. He said, and he said, they're just gone. He said, I always look at the cattle. He said, because they like to hang around the cattle, and they like to hang around horses. And they'll catch horses, and they'll braid their hair, braid their tails, braid their manes. I've even looked at some examples of that in California. And I think that they get after people when people aren't acting right. If you I had a family that had a whole bunch of kids, and the kids were drinking real heavy, and the Bigfoot would come to the house and slap the walls of the house, and just raise hell with them, and I said, maybe it's because your kids aren't acting right. Your kids are out there bringing a bunch of other kids in, they're all drinking out there in the pasture and just raising hell and throwing. I said, maybe he don't want that. Maybe that's what it was. He don't want that attitude around that's where his land is. So I interviewed some guys, some Indian police from Utah, and they were talking about seeing Bigfoot, and he said, there's a dividing line between where we are, our Indian people, and where Bigfoot lives. He lives on this side, we stay on this side. We rarely go over there, but we exchange gifts, and he called it the Red Rock. Okay. He said there's a big red rock, and really it's from the mold and the stuff, and it turned red. But they would go up there and they would trade. Okay. human beings would go over and put something on a red rock, and the next day they'd come back, there'd be something there. So they would gift one another back and forth. Finally, this one young man said, I'm going over there, and I'm going to kill one. I'm going to kill one of them, just to show that, that they're there. And they said, oh, you don't need to be going over there. Don't go over there. And he said, no, I'm going. So he got his horse, and they watched him right away. His family, his friends, watched him right away, crossed that dividing line, and right over into the. And he said, I'm going to go over into these meadows over there. And so about 4 days, they never heard a word from him. So they said, we better go look for him. So they went out, and they went looking for him. And they kind of knew where he was going to go, but they went that way, and they went even further, another half a day, and they found him in a meadow, and he was all watered up like a ball.
Oh, wow.
He was covered in tree sap. They put tree sap all over him, and he was just stuck him together like a ball. And so his friends picked him up and took him back home, tried to clean him. And they asked him, they said, what happened? He said, I have no idea. He said, the last thing I saw was, he said, I was riding my horse over this meadow, tall grass, he said, and I'm riding through this tall grass, and the last thing I saw was my foot. Something jerked me off my horse, and I saw my foot like this, my right foot. He said, and that's the last thing I remember, was seeing my foot. Wow. And he lost his gun. His horse never came back, and he said, I'll never go over there again. He said that was a mistake for me to go over there with that attitude. So he said maybe they felt like I was a threat.
Yeah, and maybe there was that respect from them trading gifts that they didn't kill him and they just left him, like, we're going to tie you up gift, basically, and be like, hey,
excellent,
because they could have torn him to pieces and no one would ever know.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That they said, look, we're going to give him back to you
one
this
chance.
time.
Yeah,
we're going to give him back to you. So, wow. So that I thought that was really interesting. But I'd heard that they're putting tree sap on people before.
Yeah.
Putting tree sap on people and wadding them up. And a long time ago, Indian people, when they traveled from one old camp to another campground and whatever was in between there, whether it was enemy country or their own country or an area that what they called a safe area or an area that nobody claims. Mm-hmm. And that once they hit that certain area, they would start singing songs, what they call trail songs. And the trail songs was to let the spirits know, we're not staying here. We're just going through to someplace else. We're not here to get to bother you, but we are riding through. And they called them trail songs. And I heard about those for a long time, trail songs. And once I started talking to Indian people from anywhere from Southern California to Oregon to Utah to Washington, California, they all talked about before white people showed up, and that they had ceremonies. The Northern California tribe, they had a deer ceremony, and they had a ceremony for the deer, and they would last a day. And they would sing these songs, and Bigfoot would come down and actually come to the dance grounds and participate with them in the ceremony. But when the whites started coming to India, the Bigfoot backed off, and he stays in the mountains. But he stays up there and listens to the songs and sings them, but he doesn't come down anymore. Yeah. Now they know he stays up there, but they don't come down. Yeah. And so I heard that about here in Oklahoma. Some tribes that have had ceremonies since the 1800s. They had ceremonies and turkey songs, and it's a 2 or 3 day ceremony. And they say that the spirit stays up there. He doesn't come down here anymore, but he stays. Some call him the spirit. Yeah. He stays there and he listens to the sing, and he likes to hear him sing, but he don't come down like he used to. And another tribe said the same thing. Oh, we have our ceremonies, and he comes in. We've seen him quite often, and he comes in, and he stays back, but he listens to the songs, and we share those songs with him. So you hear that from different parts of the country.
Yeah.
And my own personal observation is that the Bigfoot people or the Sasquatch people that they see in Oklahoma and Arkansas and Texas, in its lowlands, some people call them skunk man, and that they're not as robust looking. But those that live in the mountains, they're thicker, they're bigger, because they're running up and down the mountains. And the mountain Indians say that, you can see where they ran, because they would run down these mountain slopes that are 45 degrees, and to slow themselves down, they would grab a tree and hang on to it, and it would just push the tree over. And then they would grab another tree and push it over. And so you could look down and you could see where they ran. And sometimes you could see a tree where they grabbed it and they hung on, and it didn't collapse. They just twisted it off with their grip, just twisted. And so you could see trees that were twisted going down there. And I said, you could see where they ran down these canyons, and just trails of them. And so you see those kind of things, and there's a lot of abandoned cabins up in California and Oregon, on Indian land, that people would only come in periodically, and leave them. And I interviewed a woman and her niece that watched. They were in a cabin, and they spent the night there. And the cabin was on an embankment, and the window was almost 10 foot up. If you counted down, the window's up real high. And first off, they smelled something. And the aunt took a blanket and covered the little girl up, because she said, the Bigfoot's around here. So she covered the little girl up, and they're sitting there. And this window, pretty soon, something stuck his head in the window. And she said the window's, and his head just barely stuck through there, and he looked at him. She said, and his teeth were green. His teeth were green, and he was almost bald-headed. She said, so he was an older, they called him, they had a name for him, but it meant boss of the woods. They are the boss of the woods. And so the little girl peeks out, and she sees him too, So they both see him, and they leave the next day. And they go out back, and I see, she said, the window was way up there. He had to be 9-10 foot tall, easy. Yeah. And then I interviewed a school teacher. He's an Indian man on a reservation in California. And he goes to one of these cabins, and he's in the toilet sitting down, and there's a window above him, quite a ways above him. Mm-hmm. And he said, I could smell something, it didn't smell right, he said. And I'm looking, and pretty soon this hand comes through that window, he's doing this, and he said, I fell off the commode. He said, and crawled out, and me and my uncle ran outside, and they said they watched him run down one of those ridges, those cliffs like that, and just disappear. Wow. But they measured that window, and I'm going to say they said it was 3 foot by like 28 inches, uh-huh. And his forearm, his shoulder, filled up the whole window. Yeah. About how.
Oh my gosh! It's like, if they're that big, do they have invisibility capabilities? Like, how do they hide so well? That's my first question.
Well,
and then you mentioned the smell too. That's very distinctive. It sounds like.
They think some of these researchers say there's portals.
Okay.
Time travel, different dimensions, mm-hmm. that they know where these portals are, mm-hmm. and they can disappear into them. Okay. I interviewed a woman that was, I can't remember where she was. I want to think. Somewhere in Northwest America. And she was just out walking. Just because it's a beautiful day, she's out walking and parks her car on the side of the road and walks into this meadow. And she's going to walk across the meadow, and there's a dead tree out there, a big dead tree. It'd been there for quite a while. And then she says, I watch an elk come running out, and it kind of prancing around, she said, and she said, I'm afraid he might attack me. So she goes to this log, and she gets on it, saying, well, I can get behind it, I can get in, I can hide. And it's probably 15 foot. And she's on one end where the trunk is, the root ball. And this elk comes across in front of her and runs to that log and leaps in over it and disappears. She said he just disappeared like that.
Yeah.
And that's probably a portal. Uh-huh. And I interviewed a guy in California. He said he was out hunting. And it's someplace in California where there's very unique trees, and I can't remember the name of it. But he's watching with binoculars, and he sees two Bigfoot standing down there, older one and a younger one. He called the younger one an alpha. That's what he said, it's an alpha. He said, it's one that probably, if somebody's going to be aggressive, it's going to be him. He said, and they were standing there, and one turns and walks away and makes a left-hand turn and just disappears. He said he just dissolved right in front of my face. He said he had to see that. And the other one just stood there like, I'm not going there, He says, but when that one disappeared, he said, I was afraid where he would show back up. When he showed up.
Right, he's behind me.
Yeah. So he said, I left. He said, I wouldn't left, but I flew to San Diego and interviewed him in an airport.
Wow.
And we painted the guy walking into a portal.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of stories about portals and dimensionals, and they going in at different dimensions, and people disappearing, and some people walk into one, they don't know how to get out.
Yeah.
But supposedly, these animals and Bigfoot, they transport themselves and they know how to come and go. Mm-hmm. So that's what the theory that a lot of people have, that they recognize portals, and they know where they are, and they know that if they move, they recognize them. And I looked at a photograph of a portal, and if you just looked at it, you would say it just looked normal until you focused on it. Like I say, so focus on this. So you focus, then you can see the shimmering. You can see the shimmering in a spot, And I say, God, I wouldn't have noticed that if you hadn't told me. He said, that is a portal. That's where people walk into. And I interviewed a family that their husband disappeared in a national park. And they said somebody could hear his voice the next day hollering, and they surmised that he stepped into a portal and didn't know how to get out.
Gosh.
So and so, but they could hear him, but they couldn't find him.
Oh my gosh.
So there's just little things like that makes you think about, what is this? There's a lot of things that we don't know anything about.
Right.
Thousands of things, and there's a lot of places that are sacred. Something happened, and we all have special places that we like to go. And say, well, I like to go over there. It feels good. I feel good there, and something probably 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years ago, something happened there that had some power, had some strength, and it's still there. You can get that peaceful feeling, and so there's a lot of places like that. I got a place on my property. I got a cave on my property. I own 120 acres, and there's a cave as big as this room there. And there's a couple other places that my wife and we like to go there. Mm-hmm. We like to go there, And I said, there's something happened here. It's a special place. And I had a psychic come out to my property and walked around, and she said, Indians camped here a long time ago. She said, well, I got a spring, a creek that runs through my property. Mm-hmm. It runs year-round. And I said, that Indians camp around springs. My mother said, spirits are around springs. She said, spirits are all around springs. She said, so this psychic, she told me, she said, I actually see old Indians walking around here. I said, don't tell me that. I said, don't tell me that. I said, she said, yeah. She said, they camped here. Well, I have found arrowheads on my property.
Yeah.
And
wow.
So there's different places. And I knew a medicine man that he was a rainmaker.
Okay.
He's a Comanche guy, Wuji watchtaker, and he had a bear hide, and this lady had his bear hide, and she was going to sell it to this man in New York. And I said, "Don't send that to New York." I said, "What do you want for it? I'll take it. I'll pay you for it. I don't want it to go to New York." I said, "It needs to be here." And I said, "Well, it needs to be here among people where it came from." So I bought it from her. I took it home, and I hung it. I didn't hung it. I laid it on the floor downstairs. Then I decided it was a medicine hide for this medicine man. He used it. So I said, "It's not for people to walk on." So I took it upstairs and put it in my bedroom over in the corner, laid it down. And one day I walked by, and that bear hide had cut itself in half.
Oh my God.
Just like you took a scissors, cut it in half. And I thought, what the heck? Take it back. First, the claws were cut off. Had claws on it. Yeah. Then the claws were cut off, and the claws were separate. I gathered up the 4 legs of claws, and I put them in a bag. And I thought, what is going on, you know? Yeah. And then the next day, it was cut in half. And then the next day, it was cut in quarters. So I put them all together, rolled them up, tied them up. I didn't tell my wife. Took them down.
Gina would have loved it. It's not something you want to tell Gina.
I took them down to this place that we like to go to. It's just it's a little clearing, and I hung it in a tree. Yeah. You know, because I said, you know, it needs to go back where I put it in a tree. And about 2 days later, I went back down. My wife went down and she said she saw it, and she came back. She said, "Harvey, there's a hide in the tree up there." And I said, "Yeah, I know, Gina." I said, I did that. I said, "That's Wuji's bearskin." She said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And so we went down there, and it was out of the tree. It was laying on the ground, and all the hair was gone. It was just weird stuff, you know. And so there's just things like that go on among people, and I believe those kind of things. You know, I was raised that way. Yeah. I was raised to about those kind of things, and I was a Vale baby, you know. And they said, "Oh, you're a Vale baby." Those old ladies said he's going to be a chief, you know, and so that's what they named me. He's going to be a chief. Yeah. And so. And I went to Vietnam, came back, and you can change your name from a little boy's name to an adult name. And I never did. I just kept my little boy's name until the chiefs came and got me and made me a chief. Then I changed my name. And so, you know, that's kind of the way I was brought up, you know, just those kind of things. And so we always heard of the spirit, the Bigfoot. I've always heard about him. And years ago, there was a Cheyenne society called the Hairy People's Society. There was a war society. And it eventually changed to the Hairy Rope people. Okay. And that's where my family is from, the Hairy Rope people. And I thought, that's a passed down. Yeah. Now, we have that clan, but it's not active. But Cheyennes have 4 war societies and 1 chief society, and women's societies. So there's a lot of things like that drew me to that spiritualism about the animals and people and things. So there's just a lot of great stories out there that Indian people know, and they talk about the Choctaws talk about warring with another tribe and were being defeated, and the Choctaw Bigfoot came to help them, and the Bigfoot slaughtered all of the enemy by himself. Yeah. You know, but they were allies. You know, so they were allies, and some people say you don't want to be around them because they'll catch you and they'll eat you. Some of them are cannibals. Some of them call them cannibals. You know, they eat people. They steal children. They steal babies. They steal people. Yeah. So it's just a lot of, you know, depends on who you are and how you feel about something, you know. I'm just personally very cautious about when I go somewhere and someone say, "Well, I need to go over there," and I say, "You know what, I'm not ready to do that. Yeah. I'm not ready to get involved with that. You don't know. Maybe you offended somebody, you know. They're throwing rocks at houses and stuff like that, you know, wanting you to go away."
Yeah, and I guess, you know, if they are clearly very intelligent, and there's energy is a thing. They could probably feel the energy, good or bad, right? And regardless if we verbalize our intent or somebody verbalizes their intent, that energy is positive or negative.
Yeah.
And if they're that intelligent, they could feel that, sense that energy.
Yeah, and they perceive that you're here for no good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Wow. That's fascinating.
Or my kid, or my children, my babies are here.
Yeah.
I had a guy that used a heat-seeking camera in southeastern Oklahoma, and he set up on one mountain ridge to the other mountain ridge, and he said, you could see all these 20 little things just running all over. And he said, he was with about 4 or 5 guys, so several of the guys said, we're going to go over there. So they went over there, and they could see that their guys were a different size.
Yeah.
Size,
sure.
light, it's different light. And they said, and this side would walk right next to one of these little ones.
Yeah.
And they would just walk right by them.
But they couldn't see them.
They didn't see them.
But you could see them on the camera.
But you could see the heat seeker. And
wow.
And what they said was that's 20 little ones that were. One guy said one of them ran by and slapped me on the leg. He said, and they said, well, if there are 20 babies, that means there's 20 mothers and probably 20 daddies. Somewhere in this area.
Yeah.
If all these little people are out there playing in these mountains, and all doing different things.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think
so I said, and they take me down there, and I said, I'm not going over there.
No.
I'm going to stay right here.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just not ready to go over there. One day maybe I may be ready, but I'm not ready to go over there.
Yeah, one day you go back to that 78-year-old woman who's like, I'm going to walk down there and go see him. Why would you do that?
Why do you? I'm 78 years old. She said, I wanted to see him.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming down. Thank you for sharing some stories because, it's super fascinating. And then the interviews that you've done, obviously we just scratched the surface on the stories that you learned and were told. But where can, if someone's listening and they want to go do some more research, so Dave has done a bunch of books?
Dave Paulides has got a site.
Okay.
Paulides, Dave Paulides.
Okay.
And he's a retired California police officer.
Yeah.
And does research. And he's made 2 movies, written 6 books about paranormal, missing people out of parks, and what you should do if you're in a park. You ought to have some kind of locator on yourself and things like that. And don't go into certain areas.
Yeah.
So and he's done a lot of research. He's a smart guy. I've learned to love him like a brother.
And, great. And then your website is just your name, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so harveypratt.com.
Yeah, and the HOOPA, HOPPA project, and the Bigfoot project by Dave Paulides. I've got all of my illustrations in there and the stories in there.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And I know the people listening will get a lot of value out of this.
I hope so. I hope so. Just that you use some common sense,
Yeah. For safety, for if anything else,
Exactly.
People like to hike around Oklahoma. We got plenty of state parks you want to go in, especially down southeastern, southwestern, northeastern Oklahoma, northwestern, like the state parks all over. Yeah, just
people that are out in the national parks and they've got their kids with them, and kids run over here like little kids do, and they just disappear.
Yeah. Can't imagine.
Thousands of people disappear in national parks every year. Wow. Thousands.
Yeah.
And Dave does a whole research on missing people out of national parks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much
you
for
bet.
coming.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. It was nice.
Definitely.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at OklahomaHOF. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them. do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffees really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffeeford.net, and then on Instagram at diffeefordlincoln. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my 2 pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my 2 golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. And the one thing that I do with the sponsors that I have is stuff that I use and recommend, like the Diffees with my car, Hall of Fame. They're awesome. Citizens Banks, where I bank. Chickasaw Nation, huge supporter of Oklahoma. And adding to that is the Doghouse. And so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too. But I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedogHouseOKC.com and follow them on Instagram at thedogHouseOKC. And hopefully our pups will run into each other.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.